It is the week of Dia de los Muertos, and as you guys know, this is a time to honor those who have departed. It is said that during this time of year, the spirits of the dead will come back and visit their loved ones in a totally cool way. This holiday is filled with just amazing foods and color and music and just there's a liveliness and an amazingness to this holiday. It's just an overall good vibe, and I highly recommend if you get the chance to come to Mexico during this time, absolutely do it. If it's the one time that you can visit Mexico, this might be the time I recommend. And so today we're talking about 8 kind of fun facts about Dia de los Muertos that maybe you didn't know. And so number 1 is before the 1980s, which is fairly recent, Dia de los Muertos was really only celebrated in smaller rural towns. It was not a big deal in places like Mexico City. It was, and still is, a very private and personal affair. Around the late 1970s, early 1980s, suddenly there was a lot of art around Dia de los Muertos, so the celebration got a lot more visibility and notoriety around the world. It started becoming kind of a big deal in 2008, like 13 years ago. UNESCO's Intangible Cultural Heritage of Humanity decided to recognize Dia de los Muertos, so again, kind of became a huge deal worldwide. And 3, this just seems so bizarre to me, but in 2018, when Mexicans saw James Bond's Spectre, the producers of the movie thought it would be cool to add a parade celebrating Dia de los Muertos, which is not something that Mexico has ever actually done. And inspired by this movie, Mexico City decided that looks cool, we're gonna start doing a parade. So yeah, James Bond, who knew? Inspired something that in my mind, I just assumed always existed. Mexico loves parades, they love parties. Surely they've always had a Dia de los Muertos parade, and no, they did not have one until 2016, a mere 6 years ago. And in the following year, 2017, places around the world, but most notably in the US, places like Fort Lauderdale, Chicago, and Los Angeles, decided to have their own Dia de los Muertos parade. So yeah, it took off like a wildfire. People loved this idea, and who can blame them? Dia de los Muertos is actually not the Day of the Dead, but rather Days of the Dead. And generally speaking, it's celebrated on November 1st and November 2nd. November 1st focusing much more on children who have passed. And November 2nd focusing on all the adults. However, in actuality, different places celebrate Dia de los Muertos very differently from each other. So some places start celebrating officially October 31st, even up to November 6th. So yeah, mainstream kind of November 1st and 2nd, but depending on where you're located, it could be a much longer holiday. Number 5, Disney's Coco was definitely all about Dia de los Muertos. I actually have not seen this movie. Maybe I should. And when deciding what to incorporate into this movie, again, different parts of Mexico celebrate it so differently that Disney had to make a decision. Ultimately, they landed on the way Michoacan celebrates Dia de los Muertos, and so it's definitely heavily influenced by that state. And in fact, when I ask people, locals in Mexico, hey, where do you recommend going for Dia de los Muertos? Where's the best place? A lot of people point to Michoacan as like the place, which is again kind of a weird notion when you think that some of the external celebrations, some of the parades, etc., is a pretty new event. And I think it might be super cool to actually go to a more rural area and see how they celebrate. However, just keep in mind that Dia de los Muertos, at the heart of it, because it is a 3,000-year-old tradition, it is considered a very private and family affair. So the ability to witness Dia de los Muertos is actually quite an honor. It's not something that everyone necessarily gets to do. So what we see outside, the parades and kind of the music that overflows into the streets, that's kind of the touristic viewpoint of Dia de los Muertos, but the heart of Dia de los Muertos is definitely a family affair. So getting to see it on a more personal level might be harder to do, although there are tours that purport to show you these events. But of course, what you can see in a tour has got to be different than what you'll see in an actual family. Number 6 is that Dia de los Muertos is not Halloween. They are two very separate events. However, parts of Mexico does actually celebrate Halloween, but they do it differently than the US celebrates Halloween, as you can imagine. But that will be its own video because Halloween, yeah, that's not what we're talking about today. Number 7 is that the deeper history of Dia de los Muertos, of course, again, is a 3,000-year-old celebration made popular by the Aztecs and Mesoamerica, and it's presumed when it was celebrated 3,000 years ago that it didn't necessarily fall on a particular day. It was not necessarily celebrated even annually. It just happened, but it was not a holiday as we kind of view holidays today. It was more of a this is what we do when this happens kind of thing. And so again, just the best guess is it was not an annual event. It happened when it happened. But when the Spaniards, and specifically the Catholic Spaniards, right, came to Mexico and Latin America, they have a tendency of wanting everything to align perfectly with their own current culture. So All Saints Day and All Souls Day already existed in the Catholic world, and so they kind of merged the two together, bringing us what we have today, celebrated on November 1st and 2nd, which is also All Saints and All Souls Day. And the number 8 thing that you might not know about Dia de los Muertos is Mexico is actually not the only country that celebrates it, which makes sense because again, it's a 3,000-year-old celebration. It started way before Mexico existed, and it followed the Mesoamerican cultures, which expands way past kind of the borders of Mexico. So there are in fact 8 other countries which claim to celebrate some version of Dia de los Muertos, although of course, until I go to those countries, I will not know exactly how similar it is. Guatemala, for example, has like a thing with kites. And so there you have it. Those are the 8 fun facts that maybe you didn't know about Dia de los Muertos. Last year, I made a full video talking a lot more about just the many things I've observed when it comes to Dia de los Muertos. You'll probably want to check that out. So yeah, where do you think is the best place to celebrate Dia de los Muertos here in Mexico? Because inquiring minds want to know.